You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 192 of Making Tracks, brought to you by those fine folk over at fandomtracks.com. I am Mark, one of your co-hosts, and joining me, he is also Mark. Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, dude?
We've said Mark 5 times already on this show. I don't feel like I can use that word again. It's been used up already.
I'm sure we shall.
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very well. I am in the palatial colour suite too at work, but it's good to be here.
Always good to talk Star Wars. I will tell you before we do anything that I have not got anything new in my collection. What about you?
So the other day, a little card came through the mailbox from Royal Mail to pick up what I thought was possibly something that I'd pre-ordered that I'd completely forgotten about. I'll be honest, it was a little bit heftier customs charge. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go down to the post office because I want to see actually what it is before I commit to paying it in case it's like a scam or it's actually something that isn't worth the money. Anyhow, this whacking very big box was put onto the counter and it said on the side, De Novo, X-Wing pilot helmet. And I was like, what the hell? I haven't ordered that. So I came home, I spoke to you, and it turns out, you being the legend that you were, put in a good word with the guys at De Novo, and they have sent me one of their brand new X-Wing pilot helmets. This is a customizable one, so this is a blank, white, plain one, but I get to mark up in the face or whatever I decide to do.
You can't say mark up. We can't use that word anymore. We've used it too much.
Damn it. So I've got that. Now, admittedly, the whole point is that I'm meant to be reviewing this, and I promised to you and to Brian Matt I would do an unboxing video. So I haven't actually opened it up yet because I'm going to do an unboxing video. So therefore, I don't want to be disingenuous and actually get ahead of the and preempt what's in the box. So I bloody hope, obviously, it is a helmet now and it's not something completely random. But
it's a cat,
and it's calling me. I really need to try and find the time to do it because I want to do a good job on it as well.
You will. I know you will. You do mention there that you won't be doing it this weekend because this weekend's rather busy. It's the weekend of Star Wars weekend. It's the 4th and 5th of May, Saturday and Sunday, which means that Fantha Tracks is going to be all over the place. I mean, we're always all over the place, but really all over the place this weekend. We're over in Leicester at the National Space Centre. We're also up at Star Wars Fan Fun Day up at Blackburn Football Club, Ewood Park. So that's going to keep us really, really busy. Galactic Gathering, Festival of the Force. You're going to be there. I'm going to be there. Mm-hmm. It's looking like it's going to be an awesome show. Used to be called Return of the Garrison. They've decided to change the name. Tell us, Mark. Oh, no, I've said Mark. Tell us, Mr. Mulcaster, what can you tell us about what's happening at Galactic Gathering?
Well, the whole thing about Galactic Gathering is that it is a charitable weekend. National Space Centre itself is a non-profit. So just by us being there, we hopefully will be raising the profile of the amazing... I don't know. Well, it's a space centre. I don't really want to call it a museum because it's not. It's far more than that. We've done this several times. It's been renamed to reflect the fact that there's more than just the 501st and Rebel Legion attending this year. We've got 501st, we've got Rebel Legion, we've got the Saber Guild, we've got Dark Empire, we've got the Droid Builders, and the Mando Mercs. So that is literally all the big global clubs which have a affiliation with, say, Lucasfilm. So that is very exciting. And more exciting is the fact that Fantha Tracks is going to be there. So the fact that we're there means that we are going to be collecting for charity. And I think we mentioned it last week, we're going to be collecting for Little People UK, which is Samantha Davis's charity that she founded. So we're going to do that kind of in her honour because we've done collections there before for her and for the charity. Basically, there's going to be loads of different things to do. So the 501st UK Garrison is going to be running their droid hunt, which is quite a fun little game, which all the other clubs are going to get involved in. Saber Guild are doing their lightsaber classes, which is free. You just basically just sign up and register for a time, and then you can swing a lightsaber. There'll be classes for younger kids, and then there'll be more adult classes. So, there'll be abilities and people of a similar size. Revolution, we're going to be doing Blaster Trooper, where you basically get to pay a couple of quid, or which is a donation, and you get to fire Nerf darts at yours truly. So there's normally a long line for that when that happens. We've got some sets. 501st, I think they've got their Empress Throne Room. And the Mando Mercs have got the jail cell. So I'm hoping that it's a case of you get arrested and you have to make a donation to be released. If you're too tight, well, I guess you spend the whole weekend inside the National Space Centre in a jail cell.
There's worse places to be than spending the weekend at the National Space Centre, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it should be fun because there's other kind of like events and panels and stuff. You're hosted or have hosted a panel, which is going to be on the Saturday, I guess, is it?
Both days. I'm told it's both days, unless it's such a flop on the first day they don't play it again. But yeah, it was recorded last week. It was myself with Vanessa Marshall, Steve Bloom, and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who's Governor Price and Hera and Zeb, of course, for an hour chatting all about Rebels and their time on the show. So it's a fascinating chat. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. I'm assuming it's being played on the big screen in the planetarium. So that should be pretty nifty. And I had my Fantha shirt on. I remembered it this time. So so that's going to be awesome. I believe that you guys and us are in the same room as well. Rebel Legion and Fantha are in the same room.
Yeah, I think we're going to be next door neighbours, which is good, which means I probably need to take my Fantha shirt as well and don it every couple of hours just to make sure that I share the love. Generally, it's considered to be one of the jewels of the trooping calendar.
And then on the Saturday evening, it's Dinner with the Stars way up in Blackburn. And on the Sunday, it's the big day itself, Star Wars Fan Fun Day. Some fantastic guests coming along to the show. Recently announced just this week, John Coppinger is now going to be a guest. He joins Ross Beedman, Stephen Spears, Amy Allen, Duncan Powell, Scott Richardson, Kevin Cornwall, Garrick Hagan, John Fenson, Derek Lyons, and Anthony Forrest at the show. A fantastic array of guests at Star Wars Fan Fun Day. So that's going to be, for Fantha, a very, very, very busy weekend. And in convention news, even more amazing convention news, and this really is amazing, Genevieve O'Reilly is the 10th Ahsoka cast member coming to Star Fury Invasion in Birmingham on the weekend of the 28th to the 30th of June at the Hilton Metropole. That has just been an insane array of guests. Yeah. Just again, deep breath. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Natasha Liu Bodizo, Iman Esfandi, Diana Lee Inasanto, Nelson Lee, Wes Chatham, Katie O'Brien, Ivana Sakno, and Omid Abtani. So all those actors from Ahsoka are all going to be there. We're very lucky here in the UK, aren't we? You know, you think of the guests that we get over from the States, let alone the guests that are already here in the UK. And that's not even touching what we're going to get at London Film and Comic Con. I mean, obviously, both of us are going to be there for that. We'll start talking a lot more about that over the coming weeks. We're getting some great guests come over to the UK, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And I think that's great. It's it's helpful, actually, that we're hosting so many productions for Star Wars. Are you going to go?
I'm very, very tempted. It's weird. They've made it clear, and it's completely understandable, that there is no recording. So we can't record the panels. We can't approach the guests. It's a very old school show. That's understood. It's in their contract, so we can't do that. So one part of me, as Fantha guy, is a bit, I'm going to see all these great talks. We can't really take pictures. We can't get any audio. But by the same token, as a fan, I kind of want to sit down and listen to all these people talk about their experiences on a show that I really enjoyed. So, and it's half an hour up the road, so I feel like I'd be foolish not to. So I am kind of balancing it out. I'm making sure there's nothing else on that weekend, which at the moment I don't believe there is. So maybe. It's a strong maybe, leaning towards possibly. As the weeks go on, it might edge towards definitely.
Hi, this is Neil Scanlon, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Leslye Headlands, her of the Acolyte. She was talking recently with Games Radar, and they delved into elements of the series, including the tone of the series and what we can expect from this show, which is new characters, new situations, certainly some familiar characters and definitely some familiar situations. But Leslye laid out what she believes the show is about. And she said, the Acolyte is a mystery. It's similar to Russian Doll, which was really about giving the audience information episode by episode, this spiral of storytelling. This is a much larger landscape, but it similarly tackles the idea of your eyes can deceive you. You're going to think the show is one thing, but then it's going to gear shift into something else and then do it again. It's a show packed with everything I wanted to explore. I wanted EU stuff in there, references to the original trilogy, The Phantom Menace, the Disney sequels. It's absolutely packed because, you may not get the chance again. So she's really gone for broke on this one. She's thrown in everything she can, see what sticks. It feels to me like it's way more thought out than just chuck it all in and see what happens. It's more organised and orderly and logical. Of that, what's your gut feeling that we're going to get from the Acolyte?
It's going to be really interesting. I like how she's likened it to Russian Doll, which was a phenomenally good series, I thought anyway. and how it's kind of spoon feeding little bits and nuggets of a story, like episode by episode. So in theory, I'd kind of think it's a little bit like Andor in respect to it's kind of a bit slow burny. On one hand, I expect to obviously be wowed by the visuals and just the fact that we're in this whole new environment, but also mixed emotions a bit when we kind of come out of an episode, right? Actually, how much have we got? Is it a case of something that we're going to need to watch a couple of times before we really get everything out of it? And I kind of hope we do, because I really like Star Wars when you go back and you rewatch a series for the first time in, since maybe it's been released and what have you, and you kind of spot something else or you see it from a different perspective. So I'm really fascinated by how Leslye Headlands is constructing this whole series. I'm also very interested to know, like, what EU stuff she's talking about. Is it EU as in Legends, or is it EU as in like the new EU, as it were? I'm sure it might be a mixture of both, because we know she is a die-hard Star Wars fan and has been for many years. So therefore, you'd think she's probably read quite a few expanded universe novels over that time. And again, it might be one of those series that you watch it once, week by week, and you get one experience. And then you sit down for a weekend, you binge it, you get another one entirely.
I recently watched Kenobi, Mando Season 3, and the Book of Boba Fett, and being away from having our review head or our even remotely critical head, because I think both of us go into these things wanting to enjoy it and taking the best of it. So I really enjoyed all three of those shows quite a way beyond, and I'm about to rewatch Ahsoka, which again, I'm looking forward to already. I want to see new stuff. I want to see new characters. I want it to feel fresh. Star Wars has got to take some chances now if it's going to prosper and move forward. It can't constantly harken back to the past. And this, ironically, is set way in the past. It's all the future. I mean, it's all Star Wars future. Even if we're stepping 100 years before The Phantom Menace, for example, there's 100 years of storytelling that you can tell leading up to something that doesn't have to completely dominate every element of that story. You can learn about new worlds and new conflicts, new characters and new scenarios. So I think that's a fascinating, fertile area to tell Star Wars storytelling in. The negativity, the insane, relentless negativity that we just get on Fantha socials, let alone anywhere else. That is just, smack your head against the wall. What the heck is going on? We've not even had this thing. We had a Korean teaser trailer drop over the weekend with some fantastic visuals. Those Nemoidians looked amazing. Yeah. I'm so stoked for that. And all of it looks great. I'm buzzed for it. And yet, negativity, and we talk about it a lot. Sadly, I don't really want us to be talking about negative stuff. I want us to talk about positive stuff. They've seen nothing and they're judging it. They've seen nothing.
Well, do you know what? I kind of hope that actually Leslye Headlands kind of sat there reading these comments on Fan4Tracks with a bit of a smirk on her face, kind of knowing you guys don't know what the hell you're talking about, and whatever it is that you're worried about isn't actually going to come to pass. That's what I really hope. And I really hope when the first episode or the first couple of episodes come out, a lot of that just gets quietened. But the chances are, even, we know how it is. Some people just have this tendency to, even though it could be the greatest thing in the world, because it's come from Disney, because it doesn't have George Lucas, because Kathleen Kennedy's still around, and this is a female director, it will be like the worst thing since EOP farting in the Boon to Eve race. And the thing is, like, we could sit here and we could call out all these people, but what's the point? If you are, drop us a comment or a question later on for listeners' questions, because we'd love to get into it.
Hi, it's John Jackson Miller, and you're listening to Fantha4Tracks.
Last week, we were lucky. We had 4 listeners' questions, which we absolutely tore into and hopefully answered to everybody's satisfaction. We haven't heard otherwise. This week, we have 2 questions. The first is from Dan Lowe. Dan is a Fantha tracker. He writes reviews for the site, including our Bad Batch reviews. His question is, for future Star Wars films and shows, what would you like to see 10 times more of and 10 times less of? So it's quite a broad question. And because I've asked it, you could be the first one to answer it, Mark. So what do you think?
Do that.
I know, that's my genius. What would you like to see more of and what would you like to see less of?
I would like to see more X-Wing pilots, and I would like to see less being hit overhead with obvious cross-franchise tie-ins. I'm thinking about High Republic era stuff making its way into comics, try and retcon its existence. It needs to find an organic way to be slotted in. And it always feels like if that's the flavour of the month, we're going to cram it down the throats and then going to move on.
I like that answer a lot, because I think with Star Wars, our understanding for a long time has been that hyperdrive lightsabers, the Force, Jedi, all of that has been around for multiple millennia. 25,000 years, some certain things there have been around. So over the span of 200 years, technology really isn't going to leap forward that much. And I do think sometimes there's too much of a correlation between how fast technology moves here on Earth in the 21st century and how fast it would move in the Star Wars galaxy. I do think that's one mistake they made with The Last Jedi, for example.
Yeah.
It felt like there was big leaps in suddenly they know how to hyperspace track. That's something that you would imagine they would have been trying to figure out for centuries, if not millennia. Anybody who's escaping from the law, escaping from a bounty, escaping from whatever, if you could track them through hyperspace, that's the mother lode, and they magically find it in The Last Jedi. So there's little things like that that concern me. And for example, I don't see really why a starship in The Force Awakens, an X-Wing in The Force Awakens, should be that much better than an X-Wing in A New Hope, because they're only 35, 40 years apart. So in the Star Wars galaxy, that's nothing. That's a few iterations. That's nothing. So that's something that I think they can ease back on a little bit if they want to. A bit like the TIE fighters, in that you imagine the First Order TIE fighters, they're a bit bigger and they've got hyperdrives and they've got shields. So they're a bit meatier. But if the Empire hadn't just been banging them out like 3D printed ships, they could have put hyperdrives in and they could have put shields on them and they could have made them more powerful if they wanted to. And it wasn't that design was getting better, like going from a Cortina to a Sierra sort of scenario where you're increasing and making it a slightly different vehicle. They would have had that technology then. They could have done it. It's just that they didn't do it because of other choices. It's almost like the choices are external. It's maybe a financial thing. Maybe they just don't value their pilots that much.
I mean, funnily enough, it's kind of a bit of a chat. We actually had in the fanfare group. Why was like clone trooper armor so good? And then by the time of like A New Hope, and that Stormtrooper armor is so rubbish, and let through literally like a stray fart. My kind of theory was that it came down to obviously the sheer number of mass production. And obviously, I think Sander was kind of like getting at the fact that they had bigger, better, more expensive things to spend the money on, i.e. Death Stars, rather than, raw recruits. And I think in some respects, like with the TIE fighters, they were always meant to be kind of dropped off by like a capital ship or like, patrol planets and stuff. They weren't, their original, design wasn't to actually be able to go around like hyperspace and stuff like that. There was no need. But then I suppose if you kind of look at it, even between, and so this isn't even, I don't even necessarily think it's a Disney era thing. You could almost put some of the portion down to the prequels, because those Jedi Starfighters, they had those hyperspace rings. And then by the time A New Hope has rolled around, which isn't as a bigger gap as like in my head, I always expected it to be. Everybody's got hyperdrives in like Starfighters.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds. Bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Got a second question, and it's from a bit of a celebrity. It's Mark Hamilton, the bass player in chart-topping rock band Ash. And his question is, Star Wars tour sales are in steep decline. There are a lot of contributing factors, but the most concerning must be disengagement or disenchantment with the brand. Will we see an attempt at course correction anytime soon, now that those in power must be noticing the bottom line, or can we expect continuing to make the same mistakes while hoping for different results? So that's a very on-the-nose question. Mark's a big collector, clearly concerned, as you can tell from that, probably slightly frustrated. I know Mark is a big Stan Solo collector, so he's out there purchasing toys that Hasbro or Kenner didn't make, but Stan Solo do make. A lot of collectors like to get these quirky things. I know our very own Paul Naylor also collects Stan Solo. Mark and Paul trade and swap and collect a lot, so that's their big passion. But it's a fair question, isn't it? And probably a broader question. How closely are Hasbro listening to the fandom? How eager are they to engage with the fandom? I know they do, but how much are they really listening when Hasbro get their directives from Lucasfilm and probably even more specifically from Disney? How do you make that work? How do you try and figure out what a fan base wants? Because Mark is in his 40s, been collecting since way back when. He's got a long history with Star Wars as a collector and as a fan. And there's a certain thing that he would want. I'm picking him as an example, as opposed to the 10-year-old kid that's just started loving the Bad Batch and he or she or they want. How do you find that balance? How do you think? It's a tricky question.
It's one, I mean, I really, this last year or so, it's bugged me a little bit as my own choice in collecting has altered a little bit. Space and money aside, which I think everybody, even the great Steve Sansweet, has always said there's just never enough space and there's never enough money to collect everything, especially these days. That might be one reason for my disengagement in the collecting community is I think over like the last couple of years, I've suddenly become very much aware of there's no real desire to make good quality products for collectors. It's just to get stuff out there. It's a difficult thing, isn't it? Like you're trying to kind of like appease two completely different ends of kind of collecting community by the same company. And I don't think they've quite got it right yet. Black Series is a good step towards it. And I think Vintage Collection is a good step towards it. But again, those are kind of, I think, focus for the collectors. But is it the fact that society's changed as well? My very young nephews and nieces, under 5 or 6, they play with toys, and some of them, and they've got like Star Wars toys and stuff, partly because I've made a point of them having Star Wars toys. But then as they get older, it becomes a screen orientated thing. Is it a phone? Is it like an iPad or something? And that's just, I think, the unfortunate nature of what happens. This weekend, it's May the 4th weekend, Rebel Legion and 501st members, and like all the other clubs, we were invited to Smith's Toys, to Lego, up and down the country. I couldn't even tell you which ones we're at because there's so many, and each store has its own different way of organising it, so it makes it very difficult to track. So there's definitely a push towards keeping Star Wars engaged. I think the series that we've had, other than Mando and Grogu, aren't very toyetic. Andor's not the kind of show that really is going to sell figures to kids. And I don't think Bad Batch, absolutely. But maybe it's down to they look at the raw numbers and they go, well, actually, not many people are watching it compared to Andor. So therefore, that's not where the collectors, or maybe they think that the collectors don't want the Bad Batch. They just want Andor figures. It's difficult. We're never going to get a straight answer as to what the decision is. But, you think back 25 years ago to those heady days of the Phantom Menace when everything, you couldn't walk anywhere without tripping over Hasbro toys. But also, I quite like when you don't see Star Wars toys in every single shop all the time, because you kind of then walk past it. It becomes just part of the scenery. It's as disposable as toothpaste, and it shouldn't be.
I think they're caught between two stools because clearly, even now, even with the sequel trilogy, with all the TV stuff, take aside The Mandalorian. I mean, that's its own thing. You could just make Mando and Grogu toys, and they would be doing very, very well. But it still seems to me that the real big seller, the thing that if they only could make toys from one thing, they just made Han, Luke, Leia, Stormtrooper, Darth Vader, R2-3PO, they would still do very, very well. Yeah. And there's certain perennials that have to be in there. Matt Booker, retailer for multiple decades, knows his stuff and has said more than once, in a case mix of, let's say, vintage collection figures, you should always have your troops. You should always have a Mando. And there's certain figures that should always be in there. So in that sense, there's a logic to that. There's collectors who want to see certain characters redone, done with photoreal, done with new deco, done with whatever. But then by the same token, when they rebox stuff, when they re-release stuff, when they put it into the archive collection or whatever, there's the complaints, oh God, that figure again. They're just repackaging, they're just revamping. So there is a difficult balance. And of course, they've got to find the middle way because tooling's not cheap. Getting stuff on the production line's not easy because there's not the amount of factories there used to be. So there's lots of factors that make what they do difficult. But I think going back to Mark's sort of specific question, he says Star Wars toys are in a steep decline. You're right. I mean, I go into Smith's Toys quite regularly, and there's drops and drops and drops of WWE figures, and maybe half a drop of Star Wars, most of which are kids' toys, lightsabers. Yeah, the Bounty collection, a few Black Series, a few retro collection figures. Is it disengagement with the brand? Is it disenchantment with the brand? Where do we lie with Star Wars? Ultimately the biggest selling toys ever.
Part of it comes down to having films. The problem is if you have multiple different series of Star Wars TV shows, and they take 2 or 3 years to come out, but yet there's enough coming out. By the time they land, and if Lucasfilm and Disney aren't allowing Hasbro to kind of get ahead of the curve by releasing images and stuff to get the figures ready, so that when Acolyte drops, all these figures are actually on the shelves, then by the time they actually make it anywhere, the kids are moved on to something else because kids are fickle. We'll still get excited and the collectors will. I'd be curious to know what the split is between collectors buying stuff from Hasbro and other more casual families and kids with pocket money. Supply and demand at the end of the day. I can still walk into an entertainer and there's still those Star Wars Rebels Princess Leia figures on the Rogue One cards. You kind of go, okay, that's probably time to move that on a little bit. But then that's what happens, isn't it? There's a hierarchy. They go on to Hasbro Pulse and In Demand Toys and Star Action Figures, and then like some of them will make their way to Smiths, and after about 6 months or a year, they might be an entertainer, and then it'll be B&M and what have you, and it kind of like slowly gets eroded. I didn't see any of those, like, the Jedi Adventures figures, like for ages and ages, and now I see them in all the Tesco's and stuff, just sat there swinging, poor old Nubs or Nibs, whatever his name is, just swinging in the wind because no one wants to buy them, because the show's been out and it's now buried in Disney Plus, and people don't know what it is.
Hello, this is not R2D2. This is John Thompson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Do you think it is because, and again, Mark sort of lays out quite a broad question, but there is now so much Star Wars, and that there isn't the time to focus in on specific things? I'm thinking when the Tartakovsky Clone Wars came out in 2003, and we had a range of figures back then. We had a range of figures for Shadows of the Empire, for example. Then it felt niche in the sense that this is something different. This is something a bit special. This is something you'd want to get all of them, because they probably ain't going to do this again. And yet now we don't have your regular 3 3/4 figures. You have the vintage collection, but your regular old school Star Wars figures that we used to get, Power of the Force and that sort of stuff, 30th anniversary, those kind of figures don't happen anymore. So it just strikes me as a very difficult balance to strike. And also it's been a massive success, but also a lot of fans are stepping off from the Black Series now. And so the focus has been completely, well, more than just split, because you've got Black Series and Vintage Collection 3 3/4 and Retro Collection, again, 3 3/4. And so now they've got so many lines. Do you think they maybe need to hone back in? Where does the focus need to be?
Tough one. Yeah, well, the thing is that I'm only collecting retro, partly because they're kind of cool. One of my favorite collectibles is the Power of the Force 2. They basically did a retro collector's set of Luke and a few other figures, which looked like the vintage figures, and they weren't very popular as such. They weren't. I don't think many people kind of picked them up. I don't think they're widely available. It might have even been a Toys R Us exclusive, if I'm honest. 10 years ago, I'm pretty sure collectors were complaining that there were too many individual lines. And I think that was the thing. So they said, okay, we'll scale back. We'll just do Black Series and we'll just do Vintage Collection. Vintage Collection makes sense, I think. I like the lineage and kind of like, I suppose, the legacy going all the way back to like the original first figures. And so even though I don't collect them anymore, that would be something that I would say, keep. I suppose as a company, they've got to be innovating. They've got to be pushing the envelope forward a little bit, because they've got shareholders and people who are like, where's my money coming from? You have to have the accessible toys for the young kids, pocket money action figures that allows them to get their hands on something which isn't going to cost 25 or 30 quid for a figure. Because ultimately, how are you going to kind of nurture any new fans if you basically price them out of the market to begin with?
That's got to be a massive factor, hasn't it? I mean, again, Mark says disengagement or disenfranchisement with the brand. That's the separate issue almost to the toys. That's a broader issue, isn't it? But being priced out of a fandom or a toy, I mean, we've got to think of them as toys. We're grown-ups now. We think of them as collectibles. These things should come into kids' hands and be off that bubble in a second. They shouldn't remain in that state like they do for me, because I'm not collecting them to play with them like I used to as a kid. I'm collecting them because I like them. I like the whole package and yada yada. But these are ultimately, as you say, toys. One thing he says, can we expect them to continue to make the mistakes while hoping for different results? Well, maybe if there's less, in his words, disenfranchisement with the brand or disengagement with the brand, and a new, let's say the Ray film comes out or the next TV series comes out, and Acolyte is an over-the-board success and it's doing great in the ratings and it's getting award nominations like Andor did, which was, as you said, completely untoyetic. And we had that first range of Acolyte figures, which were pretty much all Jedi characters. So you had a batch of characters that all very much looked the same, because it's a bit like when Force Awakens came out and they didn't want to show us Rey. They want to hold that character back. I mean, we know, we've seen that Korean trailer. We know there's Nemoidians, there's other stuff. So there's cool stuff to come. They've got such a difficult balancing act. But if the next Star Wars movie comes out and it's $1 billion film and people are like, get in, fist pump, Star Wars is back, you could expect the toy lines, the toy ranges to start elevating again, being more in your face like back in the day. Maybe that is where they'd hope to be.
you're responding to market forces a little bit as well, aren't you? The fandom is still an aging fandom. As much as they are, they're trying to get and attract younger fans, and they probably are, but are those fans buying? Are they buying like anywhere near as much as like what we do? When The Force Awakens came out, or even actually when that second trailer came out, that second teaser trailer, when Han and Chewie kind of get onto the Falcon and stuff, I'm pretty sure that like some of those vintage Star Wars figures from the original vintage, those doubled in price overnight, because suddenly the nostalgia factor is back, and the guys like me and you, our parents didn't buy us many Star Wars toys, and we haven't really bought them. Suddenly we've got that burning desire to buy them again. And I've seen that. You've seen people kind of like go onto Echo Live and stuff like that, and buying out everything left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
And now, for almost 10 years to the release date of Force Awakens, same people are now like, I'm moving my collection on. Ebbs and flows. And that's what's going to happen. As long as they produce Star Wars, they will be producing some form of action figure. And as long as they're producing Star Wars shows and Star Wars films, unfortunately, we always think that Hasbro aren't doing the right thing. Awesome. Well, from one Mark to another Mark, I'd like to thank you, Mark, for that awesome question that you sent in, talking about Mr. Mark from Ash, not you, Mr. Mark Newbold. So if you want to be like Mark, any Mark, all the Mark, and you want to send in a listener's question, Mark can tell you how you can do it.
Top marks for that, Mark. Well done. This is exactly how you can do it.
Visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely so no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me done for this episode. I'll be seeing you at the weekend, won't I?
Absolutely, yes you will. I'll be there. National Space Centre, everybody. Make sure you get there. And if you can't get to National Space Centre, make sure you get to Star Wars Family Fun Day up in Blackburn. That will be a rip roaring weekend. And if you can't get to either of those, make sure you go and see The Phantom Menace at cinema, because I've got a feeling I'm not going to get time. How about you?
I'm going to try. Fingers crossed.
So, on that note, have a wonderful May the 4th. This has been episode 192 of Marking Tracks. And until next week, stay safe, take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.